When Ezra McCullough found the woman buried beneath 3 feet of snow with a treasure map clutched in her frozen fingers, he reckoned Providence had finally remembered his name. The February wind howled through Devil's Canyon like a banshee seeking vengeance, but Ezra barely noticed anymore. 23 winters in these mountains had taught him to read the language of storms, and this one spoke of death for any fool caught in the open. He should have been snug in his cabin by now, but the glint of something unnatural had caught his eye from the ridge above, a splash of crimson against the virgin white that didn't belong to nature's palette. His snowshoes crunched toward the anomaly, each step deliberate. At 45, Ezra had learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were singing a tune he'd never heard before. The crimson turned out to be silk, expensive silk, the kind that spoke of railroad money and Eastern refinement. Beneath it lay a woman, pale as carved marble, her dark hair fanned across the snow like spilled ink. Most men would have checked for a pulse first. Ezra noticed the leather tube clutched in her right hand as he knelt beside her, his calloused fingers finding the flutter of life at her throat. Barely there, but steady enough. She was young, maybe 25, with fine features that belonged in parlors, not dying in the wilderness. Her traveling dress, though snow-soaked, bore the hallmarks of quality tailoring. This wasn't some settler's wife caught in the storm. Well now, he murmured, his breath misting in the frigid air. What's a fancy lady like you doing in my mountains? The leather tube drew his attention again. Maps, most likely. Folks were always getting lost up here, chasing rumors of gold and silver. He'd found plenty of bodies over the years, their pockets stuffed with worthless sketches and fool's dreams. But this one felt different. Ezra had been alone for 7 years now, ever since Margaret took sick and the mountain winter claimed her. Gentle soul. 7 years of talking to his mule, Jeremiah, and carving wooden birds that nobody would ever see. 7 years of letting his beard grow wild and his heart grow wilder. He'd chosen this solitude, built walls around his grief thick as his cabin's log walls. Yet something about this frozen stranger stirred waters he'd thought were permanently still that he gathered her against his chest, surprised by how light she felt, like holding a wounded sparrow. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he caught a whiff of rosewater beneath the scent of snow and fear. The leather tube remained locked in her grip, even in unconsciousness. Stubborn little thing, ain't you? He adjusted his hold, mindful of the way her breathing hitched with each step. Don't you worry none. Ezra McCullough's got you now. The trek back to his cabin took longer than usual, not just because of his burden, but because he found himself stopping every few minutes to check her pulse, to adjust the way her head rested against him, to whisper reassurances she couldn't hear. Jeremiah brayed his displeasure at the delay, steam rising from his nostrils in the cold. Hush up, you ornery cuss, Ezra told the mule. We got ourselves a guest. His cabin sat in a natural hollow, protected from the worst winds by towering pines and granite outcroppings. Smoke still rose from the chimney. He'd banked the fire well before heading out to check his traps. The sight of it filled him with something he hadn't felt in years, the desire to share warmth with another soul. Inside, the cabin revealed the contradictions of its owner. Hand-hewn furniture sat alongside delicate wood carvings. A collection of leather-bound books occupied shelves next to crude mining tools. This was the home of a man who'd once known civilization but had chosen wilderness instead. Ezra laid the woman on his bed, the only bed, and began the careful work of revival. He'd done this before, pulled half-frozen prospectors back from death's threshold. But never had he been so aware of every breath, every flutter of eyelash, every small sound that escaped parted lips. He built up the fire until the cabin glowed with warmth, then set about removing her wet clothes with the clinical efficiency of necessity. Her undergarments spoke of wealth, silk and lace that cost more than most folks saw in a year. But it was her skin that told the real story. Soft, unmarked by hard labor, with hands that had never known calluses. What was a rich woman doing alone in Devil's Canyon? As he wrapped her in his warmest blankets, her fingers finally relaxed their death grip on the leather tube. Ezra's heart hammered as he unrolled the contents. Not just any map. This one bore the distinctive markings of government surveys, with notations in multiple hands. Rivers, peaks, and mineral deposits marked with symbols he recognized from his own prospecting days. And there, circled in fresh ink, was a location he knew well. Too well. His own cabin sat squarely within that circle. The woman stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. They fixed on his face with surprising clarity, considering she'd been near death moments before. The map, she whispered, her voice hoarse but refined. Eastern educated, he'd bet. His last nugget on it. Did you see the map? Reckon I did. Ezra settled into the chair beside the bed, the leather tube balanced across his knees. Question is, what's a lady like you doing with a map that's got my home marked on it? Her eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked truly afraid. Not of death. She'd faced that down in the snow. This was a different kind of fear. The kind that came from secrets and the men who'd kill to keep them. My name is Evangeline Hartwell, she said, struggling to sit up. And I'm afraid, Mr. McCullough. Ezra McCullough. Mr. McCullough, I'm afraid someone's been following me. Someone who wants that map very badly indeed. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Growing closer with each passing moment, Ezra's hand moved instinctively to the Colt .45 at his hip, but his eyes never left Evangeline's face. Well now, Miss Hartwell, looks like your troubles just found my doorstep. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by voices that carried on the wind like harbingers of violence. Ezra counted at least 4 riders, maybe 5, and they weren't lost travelers seeking shelter. Men who meant business rode with purpose, and these men had found their quarry. How many? Evangeline whispered, clutching the blankets to her chest. Despite her weakened state, steel had crept into her voice, the kind that spoke of breeding and backbone. Enough. Ezra moved to the window, his practiced eye reading the landscape. Snow was still falling, but not thick enough to cover tracks. They'd followed her trail right to his door. You want to tell me what kind of hornet's nest you've stirred up, Miss Hartwell? Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. The kind that gets people killed over things that should have stayed buried. The first rider emerged from the tree line, a man built like a grizzly, wrapped in a bearskin coat that had seen too many seasons. Even from a distance, Ezra could see the glint of weapons. Behind him came 3 others, spread wide in a hunting formation. Professional. Dangerous. Silas Blackwood. Evangeline breathed, and the name carried weight like a funeral bell. Ezra had heard that name whispered in saloons from Denver to Deadwood. Blackwood was a man who collected debts in blood and settled disputes with gunpowder. If he was here, this wasn't just about money anymore. Friend of yours. My late husband's business partner. Her voice carried venom enough to poison a rattlesnake. And the reason I'm a widow. The pieces clicked together in Ezra's mind like the mechanisms of a well-oiled trap. Rich woman, valuable map, dead husband, and a killer on her trail. He'd stumbled into the kind of story that newspapers paid good money for, if anyone lived to tell it. They killed him for this map. Ezra gestured to the leather tube. They killed him because he found out what it really leads to. Evangeline struggled to her feet, swaying but determined. It's not gold, Mr. McCullough. It's something worth far more and far deadlier. Outside, Blackwood's voice boomed across the clearing. McCullough, we know you're in there, and we know you've got something that belongs to us. Ezra felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest, the same feeling that had carried him through his war years, when death was a daily acquaintance. Nothing in my cabin belongs to anybody but me, he called back. That woman you pulled out of the snow's got property of ours. Send her out, and we'll let you live to see another sunrise. Evangeline moved beside him, close enough that he could smell the rosewater in her hair. Don't, she whispered. They'll kill us both anyway. I figured as much. Ezra checked his weapons, the Colt at his hip, the Winchester above the fireplace, and the Derringer in his boot. Not enough firepower for a sustained fight, but he'd made do with less. Question is, what's worth dying for on that map? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her words hit him like a physical blow. My husband discovered that your land sits on top of the largest silver deposit in Colorado territory. But that's not why they killed him. Her eyes met his, storm gray and fierce. They killed him because he found out the railroad's been buying up mineral rights under false names. The same railroad that employed Blackwood to eliminate anyone who might complicate their plans. The implications crashed over Ezra like an avalanche. His solitary life, his chosen exile, his precious sanctuary, none of it had been as hidden as he'd believed. The railroad had been circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 months. Ever since they murdered Thomas and made it look like a riding accident. Her hands clenched into fists. "I've been running ever since, trying to get this evidence to someone who could use it." Evidence. The letters that fell from my bag. Thomas documented everything: bribes, false land claims, murder contracts. Enough to bring down half the territorial government. Blackwood's voice came again, closer now. "Time's up, McCullough." Ezra made his choice the way he'd made all the important ones in his life, quickly and without looking back. "Can you shoot?" "Thomas taught me." Evangeline's chin lifted with defiant pride. "I'm not helpless." "Never thought you were." He handed her the Derringer. 2 shots. "Make them count." The first window exploded inward as Blackwood's men opened fire. Ezra dove, pulling Evangeline down with him as glass showered the cabin floor. The thick log walls absorbed most of the bullets, but the message was clear: they weren't planning on taking prisoners. "The back window," Ezra whispered. "There's a trail that leads up the ridge. You can't know." Her voice was firm as granite. "I'm done running." Something shifted in Ezra's chest, a wall crumbling that he'd spent 7 years building. Here was a woman who'd faced death and chose to stand and fight rather than abandon the only person who'd shown her kindness. It reminded him of Margaret's courage during her final illness, the way she'd refused to let him give up hope even when they both knew the ending. Another volley of shots peppered the cabin. One bullet found the coffee pot, sending scalding liquid across the floor. Another shattered his mirror, the one Margaret had insisted he keep for company. "The letters," Evangeline said suddenly. "If something happens to us, promise me you'll get those letters to Judge Morrison in Denver. He's the only honest official left in the territory." Ezra nodded, though he had no intention of dying here. Not with this woman beside him, fighting like a wildcat despite having been half dead an hour ago. Something about her fierce determination had awakened parts of himself he'd thought were buried with Margaret. That a new sound cut through the gunfire, splintering wood. They were trying to break down the door. "They're coming in," Evangeline whispered. Ezra positioned himself behind his overturned table, Winchester ready. "Let them come." The door exploded inward, and Silas Blackwood filled the frame like a nightmare. Given flesh. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes the color of old blood. Behind him pressed 2 of his men, guns drawn and ready. Well, Blackwood rumbled, his voice like gravel in a tin can. "The grieving widow and her knight in rusty armor." "Silas." Evangeline's voice was steady as stone. "Still doing the railroad's dirty work, I see. Business is business, darling. Your husband understood that, right up until he started developing a conscience." Blackwood's smile was all teeth and malice. "Same mistake you're making." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Ezra could feel Evangeline's presence beside him, could sense her finger on the Derringer's trigger. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and this room would erupt in violence. "The map, the letters, and then maybe we'll make your deaths quick," Blackwood continued. "Counteroffer," Ezra said mildly. "You turn around and ride out of here, and maybe I won't put a bullet between your eyes." Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "One old prospector and a pampered city woman against 4 armed men? I like those odds." "Then you're a poor gambler," Evangeline said quietly. She was right. Something in the air had changed, subtle as the shift before an avalanche. Ezra felt it too. The electric moment when everything balanced on a knife's edge. The 5th rider's presence announced itself with the soft whisper of a blade being drawn. Blackwood's man at the rear jerked once, made a small gurgling sound, and toppled forward into the snow. None of the others noticed, their attention focused entirely on the drama unfolding inside the cabin. Ezra caught the movement through the shattered window and felt his blood turn to ice water. The newcomer stepped into view, and everything Ezra thought he knew about this situation crumbled like a house built on sand. Judge Morrison. The same Judge Morrison that Evangeline had mentioned as the territory's last honest official now moved. With the fluid grace of a trained killer, wiping blood from a wicked-looking knife. He was younger than Ezra had expected, maybe 40, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that held winter's own chill. But it was the way Evangeline's face went white as fresh snow that told the real story. "Hello, my dear," Morrison called softly through the broken window. "I've been looking for you." Blackwood spun toward the voice, confusion and anger warring on his brutal features. "Morrison, what in the hell are you doing here?" Morrison finished mildly. "Cleaning up your mess, as usual." The terrible truth hit Ezra like a physical blow. Evangeline's supposed salvation, the honest judge who would expose the railroad's corruption, was part of the very conspiracy she'd been fleeing. "You," Evangeline whispered, and her voice carried the weight of absolute betrayal. "It was you all along." Morrison stepped through the doorway, stepping delicately over his victim. He was dressed like a gentleman. Fine coat, polished boots, gold watch chain, but moved like a predator. "I'm afraid the situation has become rather more complicated than we anticipated." More complicated how? Blackwood's confusion was giving way to suspicion. In his world, confusion was a luxury that got men killed. "Because, my dear Silas, our little widow here has been rather more resourceful than her late husband." Morrison's smile was cultured and completely without warmth. "She's discovered things that could prove inconvenient." Ezra felt Evangeline sag against him, the fight draining out of her like water from a broken dam. The betrayal was complete. Every person she'd trusted, every authority she'd planned to appeal to, all corrupt. "The letters Thomas wrote," she said hollowly. "They weren't just about the railroad's land schemes, were they?" "Thomas was always too clever for his own good," Morrison agreed. "Did you really think we'd let him document a simple mining fraud?" "No, my dear. Your husband stumbled onto something much more significant." The judge moved deeper into the cabin, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller and more dangerous. Blackwood and his remaining men watched him with the wary respect. That wolf showed a bigger predator. "The silver mine is real enough," Morrison continued conversationally. "But it was never about the mining rights. It's about what else is buried beneath Mr. McCullough's charming little homestead." Ezra's mind raced. What could be more valuable than the largest silver deposit in Colorado? What would be worth murder and conspiracy on this scale? "The railroad survey," Evangeline said suddenly, understanding flooding her voice. "The one Thomas found in your office. It wasn't for mining access, was it?" Morrison clapped slowly, mockingly. "Brilliant. No wonder Thomas fell in love with you." "What railroad survey?" Blackwood demanded. Morrison sighed like a professor dealing with a slow student. "The Union Pacific's secret route through the Rockies. The one that will cut transportation costs by 60% and make whoever controls it richer than Croesus." The implications hit Ezra like falling rocks. A secret railroad route through the mountains would revolutionize trade with California and the Pacific territories. The profits would be enormous, but only if the route remained secret until all the necessary land could be acquired. "My cabin sits on the route," he said. "The key section, actually," Morrison confirmed. "Without your land, the entire project becomes economically unfeasible, rather inconvenient, since you've proven so stubbornly resistant to selling." "I was never asked to sell." "Oh, but you were. Several times, in fact, though perhaps not in ways you recognized." Morrison's smile turned predatory. "Who do you think sent the claim jumpers 2 years ago? The ones who kept trying to establish mining rights on your property." Ezra remembered those men, rough characters who'd shown up with official-looking papers, insisting they had legitimate claims to his land. He'd run them off with threats and gunfire, never suspecting they were part of a larger conspiracy. "And the tax assessors," Morrison continued. "The ones who kept trying to convince you that your land was worth far more than you thought? That was us too, trying to force a sale through increased taxation. Every strange visitor, every official inquiry, every piece of harassment over the past few years. It had all been orchestrated to drive him away from land that was worth millions to the right buyers." "But you're a federal judge," Evangeline protested weakly. "I'm a practical man," Morrison corrected. "Federal judges make $4,000 a year. Do you know what my share of the Union Pacific profits will be?" "Enough to buy judges and killers," Evangeline said bitterly. "Among other things, yes." Blackwood was growing restless, his hand drifting toward his gun. "This is all very educational, Your Honor, but we've got business to finish. The woman and her protector need to disappear, and we need those letters." "About that," Morrison said thoughtfully. I'm afraid the situation has changed. Something in his tone made Blackwood freeze. Even through his brutal stupidity, the man sensed danger. Changed. How? Well, you see, Silas, you've become something of a liability yourself. Morrison's hand moved to his coat pocket. Too many people have seen you. Too many connections back to our organization. Now wait just a minute. Morrison's derringer appeared like magic, small and deadly in his manicured hand. The shot was incredibly loud in the confined space, and Blackwood's massive form crashed backward into his remaining men. In the chaos that followed, Ezra moved on pure instinct. He grabbed Evangeline and rolled behind the bed as Morrison's men opened fire. Wood splinters filled the air like deadly snow, and the smell of gunpowder overwhelmed everything else. The back window, Ezra shouted over the gunfire. Now, but Evangeline wasn't moving. She knelt beside the fallen bundle of letters, frantically gathering the scattered pages even as bullets whined overhead. Leave them. No. Her voice was fierce. With purpose. These are the only proof left. If Morrison gets them, everyone Thomas died for. A bullet punched through the wall inches from her head, and Ezra made the choice for both of them. He scooped her up bodily, letters and all, and dove toward the back window. Glass exploded outward as they crashed through, landing hard in the snow outside. Behind them, the cabin erupted in flames as someone kicked over the fire. Run, Ezra, gasped, pushing himself upright. Blood trickled from a dozen cuts, but nothing felt broken. They stumbled up the mountainside, following a game trail that Ezra had used for years. Behind them, the cabin burned like a funeral pyre, 7 years of solitary life going up in smoke. I'm sorry, Evangeline panted as they climbed. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. Don't be. Ezra helped her over a fallen log, his mind already working on their next move. Been getting a mite lonesome up here anyway. Her laugh was half sob, half hysteria. Lonesome? They burned your home. Home's not logs and mortar, Ezra said, surprising himself with the words. Home's something else entirely. She looked at him through snow-dampened lashes, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Whatever it was, it warmed him more than his lost cabin ever had. Behind them, voices echoed through the canyon as Morrison organized pursuit. They had maybe a 10-minute head start, and then the hunt would begin in earnest. Where are we going? Evangeline asked. Ezra looked up at the peaks above them, white and pristine against the storm-dark sky. He'd lived in these mountains for 23 years, knew every trail and hidey hole. Morrison might have money and men, but he was fighting on Ezra's ground now. Somewhere they'll never think to look, he said. But as they disappeared into the swirling snow, neither saw the figure watching from the ridge above, a figure who'd been waiting patiently for exactly this moment to reveal the final, most devastating secret of all. The figure on the ridge materialized from the swirling snow like something conjured from winter itself. At first, Ezra thought it might be another of Morrison's men, but the silhouette was wrong. Too small, too graceful. As they climbed higher on the treacherous game trail, he caught glimpses of their watcher through the storm, always maintaining the same distance, never approaching but never falling behind. Someone's following us, he murmured to Evangeline. She turned, squinting through the snow. One of Morrison's men? Don't think so. Ezra helped her over a rocky outcrop, his breath misting in the thin air. They were above the tree line now, in country where only the desperate or the foolish ventured in winter. Moving wrong. Too patient. Behind them, the sound of pursuit had faded. Morrison's men were city folk and used to mountain tracking in a blizzard. But their mysterious shadow continued to pace them, silent as death itself. The trail Ezra followed wasn't marked on any map. It led to a place he'd discovered years ago during his first winter in the mountains, when grief and whiskey had driven him to seek the highest, loneliest places he could find. A natural cave system, hidden behind a waterfall that froze solid. In winter, creating a perfect concealment. Not much farther, he promised Evangeline, who was struggling in the thin air despite her determined pace. She clutched the recovered letters against her chest like a sacred relic. Pages were missing, some lost in the cabin fire, others scattered by the wind, but enough remained to tell the story. Ezra had glimpsed fragments during their flight, shipping manifests, telegraph messages, financial records. A paper trail that led straight to the heart of the railroad conspiracy. Even if we survive this, Evangeline said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Who's going to believe us now? Morrison was supposed to be the honest one. Someone will listen. Ezra's words carried more conviction than he felt. In his experience, the truth was a luxury that powerful men rarely allowed themselves. They reached the frozen waterfall as full darkness settled over the mountains. To anyone watching from below, they would have simply vanished into the ice-covered rock face. But Ezra knew the secret, a narrow gap behind the ice, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He led Evangeline through the gap into a natural chamber that had sheltered him through the worst storm of his life, 8 years ago when he'd come here to decide whether to live or die. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside, with passages that led deeper into the mountain. More importantly, it was completely hidden from external view. How did you find this place? Evangeline asked, wonder in her voice despite their circumstances. Margaret showed me, Ezra said without thinking, then stopped. He'd never spoken his wife's name aloud to another person since her death. Evangeline was quiet for a moment, reading the weight of memory in his words. She died here. No, but I came here after, when the grief got too heavy to carry. He began, gathering the dry wood he'd cached here years ago, old habit from his trapping days. Figured if I was going to give up, might as well do it somewhere beautiful. But you didn't give up. No. Ezra struck flint to tinder, coaxing flame from the darkness. Margaret would have skinned me alive if I'd wasted her dying lessons on something as foolish as surrender. The fire caught and spread, filling the cave with warm light. For the first time since he'd pulled her from the snow, Evangeline truly smiled. Not the grim expression of someone facing death, but something genuine and warm. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Ezra settled. Beside the fire, close enough to Evangeline that he could smell the rosewater still clinging to her hair. Would have liked you, I think. Even though I brought killers to your door. Especially because of that. His smile was rueful. Margaret always said I needed more excitement in my life. Their laughter echoed strangely in the cave, mixing with the sound of wind outside. For a moment, they were just two people sharing warmth against the cold, not fugitives hiding from murderers. But reality had a way of intruding on such moments that a new sound reached them through the cave entrance. Not the wind, but something deliberate. Footsteps, careful and measured. Approaching their hidden sanctuary, Ezra's hand moved to his Colt, but Evangeline touched his wrist. Wait, she whispered. Listen. The footsteps stopped just outside the ice gap. Then came a voice, clear and unmistakably female. Mr. McCullough? Mrs. Hartwell? My name is Sarah Chun. I believe we need to talk. Ezra exchanged glances with Evangeline. A woman, alone, tracking them through a blizzard to their secret hiding place? Nothing about this situation made sense. How do we know you're not with Morrison? He called out. Because Morrison killed my brother, came the reply. And because I have something you need to see. The woman who stepped through the ice gap was not what Ezra had expected. Small and compact, dressed in practical winter gear that spoke of serious mountain experience. Her features suggested Chinese heritage, but her accent was pure Colorado territory. Most surprising of all, she moved with the confident grace of someone completely at home in this hostile environment. Sarah Chun, she repeated, pulling back, her hood to reveal black hair streaked with premature silver. I've been tracking Morrison's operation for 2 years. She reached into her pack and withdrew a leather portfolio, far more extensive than the letters Evangeline carried. My brother was Thomas Hartwell's contact in the railroad office, the one who provided him with the initial documents about the secret route. Evangeline gasped. James Chun. Thomas mentioned him in his letters. He said he'd found an ally in the shipping department. James was going to testify against Morrison and the others, Sarah continued. They found out and arranged an accident at the rail yard, crushed by a shifted cargo load. The pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place with sickening clarity. Not just land fraud or mineral rights, but a web of murder and corruption that reached into every level of territorial government. So you've been following Morrison? Ezra asked. Following, documenting, gathering evidence. Sarah spread the contents of her portfolio near the fire. Maps, photographs, sworn statements. Enough documentation to bring down the entire operation. But I needed the missing piece. The financial records that prove Morrison's judicial rulings were bought and paid for. The letters, Evangeline breathed. Combined with what I've gathered, they'll be enough to interest certain parties in Washington. People who don't appreciate having their territorial judges corrupted by railroad money. Hope flickered in Evangeline's eyes for the first time since Morrison's betrayal. You mean we might actually survive this? Sarah's expression darkened. Survival's going to be the tricky part. Morrison's not just going to give up and go home. He's got too much invested in this project. As if summoned by her words, new sounds echoed from outside the cave. Not footsteps this time, but the mechanical sounds of men preparing for war. The scrape of metal on metal, the whispered consultation of tactics. They found us, Ezra said. Grimly, Sarah nodded, checking the ammunition in a rifle that had appeared in her hands like magic. Morrison brought more men. Professional ones this time, not Blackwood's thugs. How many? Evangeline asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. 8, maybe 10. Former cavalry from their movement patterns. Sarah's assessment was clinical. Professional. They've got the cave mouth surrounded, but they don't know about the back passages. Ezra felt a cold smile touch his lips. Back passages? This mountain's got more holes than a wheel of Swiss cheese. James and I explored them 2 summers ago, when we were documenting the survey routes. Sarah moved to the rear of the cave, where shadows hid a narrow opening. There's a tunnel that leads down to the old mining claims. We can get out, but it means leaving everything behind. Not everything. Evangeline said firmly, clutching the letters. These go with us. Morrison's voice echoed from outside, amplified by the cave acoustics. I know you can hear me in there. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. We can reach an accommodation. What kind of accommodation? Ezra called back, playing for time while Sarah prepared their escape route. A generous one. The railroad is prepared to offer substantial compensation for your land, far more than it's worth for mining. And in exchange, your silence. The woman's silence. A quiet life somewhere far from Colorado territory. Evangeline laughed bitterly. Like the quiet life you gave my husband. The silence that followed was answer enough. I thought so, Morrison said finally. Very well. We'll do this the unpleasant way. The first explosion shook the entire mountain, sending stalactites crashing down around them. Morrison's men were using dynamite, trying to collapse the cave entrance and trap them inside. Now would be good, Sarah shouted over the rumbling. They plunged into the narrow tunnel, following Sarah's lead through passages so tight they had to crawl in places. Behind them, more explosions echoed as Morrison's men systematically destroyed their hiding place. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting through the mountain's heart like a stone serpent. Ezra lost all sense of direction, trusting entirely to Sarah's guidance. Beside him, Evangeline struggled through the narrow spaces with grim determination, never complaining despite the obvious strain. Finally, they emerged into another cave. This one opening onto a shelf of rock high above the valley floor. Snow was still falling, but the storm seemed to be weakening. Far below, they could see lights, Morrison's men, searching the mountain with systematic thoroughness. They'll never find this place, Sarah said confidently. But we can't stay. They'll bring more men, maybe dogs. Where do we go? Evangeline asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. To Denver. There's someone there who's been waiting 2 years for this evidence. Who? Territorial Marshal William Hayes. He's been investigating the railroad corruption, but he needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Sarah gestured to their combined documentation. This is enough to bring federal charges. Morrison and his associates won't be able to buy their way out of this one. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold. From their high vantage point, the world spread out below them like a promise of new beginnings. The sniper's bullet shattered the rock 6 inches from Evangeline's head, sending granite fragments flying like deadly hail. Ezra threw himself forward, knocking her flat against the stone shelf as the rifle's report echoed across the valley. There, Sarah pointed to a rocky outcrop 300 yards above them. Single shooter, but he's got us pinned. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The marksman was finding his range, adjusting for wind and distance with professional precision. They had perhaps minutes before he zeroed in completely. The descent trails exposed, Ezra observed grimly. He'll pick us off one by one if we try to run. Sarah was already moving, her rifle coming up in a smooth, practiced motion. Not if he's too busy staying alive to aim properly. She fired 3 quick shots at the distant position, not expecting to hit, but forcing the sniper to take cover. In the brief respite, they scrambled across the shelf toward a cluster of boulders that offered better protection. Military training? Ezra asked as they pressed against the stone. My father was a cavalry scout. Taught me to shoot before I could properly ride. Sarah's smile was grim. Said a woman in the territories needed to know how to defend herself. More shots peppered their position, each one closer than the last. The sniper was patient, methodical, working his way through their cover with deadly efficiency. We can't stay here, Evangeline said. She still clutched the letters, now somewhat worse. For wear, but intact. Even if we outlast him, Morrison's men will find this position eventually. Ezra studied the terrain with a prospector's eye for detail. The shelf they occupied was part of an old rock slide, unstable and treacherous. Below them, the slope dropped, away at a terrifying angle, covered in loose scree and winter ice. There might be another way, he said slowly. I don't like that tone, Sarah muttered. See that ledge about 50 feet down? Leads around to the south face, out of the shooter's line of sight. Ezra pointed to what looked like a goat trail carved into the cliff face. Problem is, getting there means crossing 40 feet of open ground. Another bullet struck their shelter, this one close enough that they felt the shock wave. The sniper was almost ready to make his killing shots. I'll draw his fire, Sarah said. You two make for the ledge. Like hell, Ezra replied. You're the one who knows where we're going. I'll be the decoy. Both of you stop it, Evangeline interrupted sharply. We're not sacrificing anyone. There has to be another way. But even as she spoke, they could hear new sounds from below, Morrison's search party, climbing steadily toward their position. They were caught between the sniper above and armed men below, with nowhere to run except a cliff face that would challenge an experienced mountaineer in good weather. Ezra made the decision that had defined his entire life, quickly, without looking back, and with absolute commitment. When I move, you both go for that ledge. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. Before either woman could protest, he was in motion. Not the wild charge they expected, but something far more cunning. Using his knowledge of the mountain's acoustics, he began working his way around their shelter, firing his Colt at irregular intervals to create the impression of multiple defenders. The ruse worked. The sniper's attention followed the muzzle. Flashes, his shots tracking Ezra's apparent position. In that crucial window, Sarah and Evangeline made their desperate dash across the exposed ground.